Happy Thursday, everyone. Hope you all are ready for spring break. I know I am. We got some discussions to get through today. So we're going to be talking about one of my favorite frauds of all time, Theranos. I mean, they're all great, but Theranos is a world on its own. Then we're going to be talking about the results of the investigation. In between there, we'll throw in a quiz. Why not? Yeah. A little bit of history about Theranos. I was doing this reading in the media about Theranos when the whole thing was unfolding in as far as the litigation going on. And this is about 2018. And I found out about this book called Bad Blood by John Carreyrou. And if you're interested in reading or just in a good audiobook, like nonfiction, highly recommended. I've probably listened to the audiobook like 5 times and I've read the book twice. Fascinating. I still find new things about it. I actually used to have some of my classes read the book as part of the assignment, my auditing classes. There's no auditor information in there, but it had a lot to do with kind of corporate frameworks and governance and some issues that we talk about in class. So I couldn't just let that one go since we're not doing that in any of my auditing classes. I said, this is a perfect opportunity to talk about Theranos. There's a lot of information that was shared in the video. The video was a pretty good summary of what was contained in the book, but there's a whole lot more of interesting facts in the book. And some of those are just kind of like, oh my gosh. In fact, in the classes that I've had read the book and do this discussion, they talked about like how they read ahead because they're just like, oh my gosh, I couldn't leave it on that. It was like a cliffhanger. I'm just curious about what happens next. It's pretty fascinating for nonfiction. Nonfiction, you just kind of like say, but this is a pretty good one. My only complaint is the author, John Carreyrou, kind of paints himself out to be the knight in shining armor, which he kind of is, but still, it's a little bit silly. I'm going to do a quick summary of the case. This is actually my words. It's going to sound a lot like ChatGPT, and I was reading through this. This sounds like an AI tool wrote this, and I promise you, I wrote these verbatim, okay? So 19-year-old with big ambitions and entrepreneurial spirit drops out of Stanford to pursue an idea that is deemed completely impractical by those far more knowledgeable and experienced in the field than her. Undaunted, the young entrepreneur presses critics wrong. No, wait, they were right all along. So she pivots in a more viable venture. And by pivot, I mean that she conducts a decade-long financial reporting fraud involving non-existing technology, a board of directors of old, rich, important, and ignorant white men, and a complete lack of corporate transparency aided by endless litigation threats to protect trade secrets. It all fell apart when a reporter asked the question, is this all too good to be true? And they found the answer to be yes. So yeah, that's my case summary, which if you were as creative and thorough in your case summary, I'm going to enjoy reading it. But again, I've read this case a lot more times than you have, and it's like I've read the book a lot more times, and you were just kind of given a taste. There's also, I think probably many of you are familiar with, there was a Hulu series about this that had Amanda Seyfried play Elizabeth Holmes called The Dropout. They did change some of the names from the characters, but for the most part, it's a pretty accurate representation. They portrayed Elizabeth Holmes to be fairly sympathetic at times, which I thought was interesting because it was just a different point of view than how the rest of the media portrays her. But key parties, can we say that Elizabeth Holmes is one of the key parties in here? If you did not identify Elizabeth Holmes as a key party, did you even watch the video? All right. So yeah, key party, Theranos founder and CEO. Did anybody catch how old she was when she founded Theranos? 19 years old. 19 years old when she founded Theranos. So it was basically her second year at Stanford. She dropped out in the fall semester and said, I'm going to pursue a biotech startup. And yay. All right. So another key party that we could identify that was kind of alluded to. Sunny Balwani, Ramesh Sunny Balwani. He was a very big character, and he's kind of your if you imagine like a TV show where there's like a villain who's kind of a comical villain, okay? He basically is really short in stature, kind of ugly and dumpy. Plays Elizabeth's boyfriend, but she was basically there because of his experience and his knowledge. He got very lucky in the dot-com bubble bust. He managed to cash out for a lot of money right before it bust, but he didn't recognize that. He said it was his skill that actually managed to do it. His skill, all right? So Theranos president, Holmes' boyfriend, and all-around tyrant is kind of how I have described him. And then, just as a general category, we could talk about Theranos stakeholders. There's a lot of other parties we could identify here, but I think those are the two most prominent parties, the ones who are kind of the architects of the fraud. There were a lot of people who were affected by the fraud and a lot of people who conducted the fraud outside of that. Elizabeth Holmes had a lot of yes people who basically told her what she wanted to hear because they were too afraid not to tell her what she wanted to hear. Because they told her something bad, she'd tell Sonny, and Sonny would say, "You're fired," but in a much more hostile voice, a much more hostile voice. Um, Now, with respect to that, let's go into a little bit detail about the financial impact of the fraud. So again, this was like a decade-long fraud, so it's really hard to pinpoint what the actual financial impact was. What was the restitution order amount against Elizabeth Holmes? Did anybody capture that? So she was ordered to pay $452 million in restitution. Now, we're not saying that's the entire financial impact, but that's something that's really important to note. So those were just for identifiable investment losses. Do not include losses to business partners. It talks about two very prominent business partners, well-known retail chains that are still in existence today. One of those not in this area of the world, though they used to be, or this area of the United States. So one very, very prominent, big drugstore chain. Which one's that? Walgreens, yes, okay. And then another one is a grocery store chain that's kind of on the West Coast now, though they used to be in the Midwest. What is that called? Safeway, yeah. And so very, very big losses. And there's a lot of information there. We're going to get into a little bit more detail about the nature of Elizabeth Holmes here in a little bit. But she strung them along for a very long time and very effectively. This is again one of those frauds where I'm just kind of like hearing about all that Elizabeth did, and I'm like, good job. You have nothing and you make it sound like a $9 billion company. Well done. Well done. If I could pull that off, I probably would. I probably would. I'll be honest with you guys. My ethical threshold is not nearly as thick as your guys. All right. I kid. I kid. I kid. All right. There's also some identifiable insurance and medical losses because they talked about how these people were basically having to get themselves tested twice because the Theranos readers, the Theranos devices were giving them erroneous results, just completely and totally off the chart results. So they had to actually go and pay for new testing, and insurance would have to cover the testing results. There's also the problem that they allude to, and it's very, very difficult to identify what extent it was, but the medical losses themselves. So again, I'm going to talk a little bit about auditing, and you know this is kind of a reference to what we talked about. So remember we talked about audit risk back in auditing, and I said it was a type 2 error. Does everybody remember that? If you don't, what were you listening to? Okay, so type 2 error. So scientifically, there's two types of errors: there's a type 1 error and a type 2 error. Now, remember, a type 1 error is saying that there's a problem when in fact there's not a problem. And that was kind of the situation that we were talking about in this circumstance is we were saying a lot of people were getting these results saying, yeah, you probably have cancer, or your potassium's really, really high, you're probably dead. They were getting those results and said, well, I don't feel dead, so I think I'm okay. Well, let me check with another doctor. So that's type 1 error. Now, the type 2 error, which is that auto risk that we talk about, that's when you say there's no problem when in fact there is. And it doesn't really talk about what happened in that situation, but is that a problem? Is that an issue? So let's look at it this way. Relative to type 1 error, how big an issue is type 2 error? A much, much bigger problem. Because if you say that there's a problem when in fact there is none, people can check and say, I don't think that's right. Let me talk to another doctor. And it's additional cost, but it's something that can be resolved easily. But if you tell somebody, yeah, you're completely and totally healthy, you definitely do not have a medical condition that's going to leave you rendered incapable in the next 3 days, and they in fact have that situation, that's a real big issue. So they don't really have any identification of that, but I'm certain that was probably something that happened at least once, if not multiple times. And then some interesting ones that are not talked about, but are alluded to. Can we actually say stakeholders would include the employment-related losses? So some people came to work at Theranos and they took on a lot of responsibility and they basically kind of came away with nothing. So remember they were talking about how Sonny would just basically fire people willy-nilly, and there was a lot of turnover. It actually goes well beyond the scope. So there's did anybody catch the talk about the Apple team that was talked about in the video? What did they say happened to the Apple employees that were hired by Theranos? They all left within a few months. Okay, they all left within a few months, and one of those was a fairly well-known Apple employee who was very close to Avi Tavanian, named Anna Ariola. And to take a job at Theranos, she left behind 15,000 stock options. Okay, that would have vested if she stayed at Apple. Does anybody know how much money that would basically translate into? So Apple, when I checked yesterday, was about $263 a share. 15,000 times 263, roughly about $4 million. Okay. So again, drop in the bucket compared to the overall impact, but still, I'm not comfortable if like I took a position at another university and Dr. Caden contacted me and says, well, I guess you let go of those Truman State stock options. And I'd be like, what Truman State stock options? All right. I don't think such a thing exists. Okay. I'm not as important as Anna Ariola, but still, I would be a little bit salty if that was the case. That was the situation. All right. Let's go talk about the fraud risk factors. So what was a pressure that we could identify in this particular case? How do we characterize Elizabeth Holmes? Just a very, very rational, normal human being that definitely did not want to shoot for the stars. Yeah, she would fit right in with all of us. We're all very, very normal individuals, and Elizabeth Holmes was a very, very ambitious individual. Can we translate that into a pressure? If you're an ambitious individual, it's kind of not the same pressure we always talk about. We talk about addiction, but addiction can be kind of similarly are attributed to this idea of ambition. If you're addicted to be ambitious, I guess it is. But the very beginning of the book, this book right here, they talk about Elizabeth's personality when she was a child, and she said that she wanted to grow up to be a billionaire. And they said, "Well, don't you want to grow up to be president?" And she says, "No, I want to be a billionaire because the president will marry me when they find out how much money I have." That's the ambitions of a child Elizabeth Holmes right there. So pretty impressive. Um, does that extend to anybody else? If you have somebody who's a boss who's a very ambitious individual, does that extend to anyone else that's in their circle? So let's think about it this way. You go off to work, and I know many of you have a lot of transparency about where you're going to work, but let's say you go to some place that you don't really know well, and they're saying, okay, we are going to accomplish this goal. We're going to meet revenue projections of $1 million per year, or we're going to die trying. Does that set a responsibility on you, or set kind of an expectation on you, I guess I should say? Yes. And that was the idea that Elizabeth and Sonny cultivated at Theranos. Like, we are going to make this work, or we are going to. I even shouldn't say we're going to die trying. I'm saying that we're going to make it work under any cost, any circumstance whatsoever. That was kind of the situation. So the ambitions not only extended to Elizabeth, but the ambitions kind of extended to what her expectations were for everybody else. Which, if you've got a boss who's saying this is going to work no matter what, then you're kind of under their thumb. You're kind of have a lot of pressure that's associated with that. Literal pressure. It's like actually not literal pressure. I guess more figurative. Actually, no, it would be literal. Okay. Don't you hate it when people misuse the word literally? No, it'd be literal pressure, not in the air pressure sense, but more the kind of the intangible sense. Opportunity. What can we say regarding the transparency of corporate operations at Theranos? So if we were to compare this to a pane of glass, how would you describe that pane of glass? Completely and totally covered with mud. Completely totally covered with mud. So externally, nobody had any idea what was going on. The board of directors, they actually thought that these products that Theranos had been talking about, these devices, were being deployed actively. They were actually being used. General James Maddox had thought that the Theranos products were actually being actively used by the military, and he's the 5-star general of the military, or 4-star general of the military. So he was on the board of directors and thought that these were being deployed and being used, and she was basically lying whole cloth. But it goes further than that, okay? External transparency, obviously really important, but can we say internal transparency is a problem as well? So I don't know if it's referred to in the video. I don't think it was, but internal operations were kept siloed, which basically meant that different departments, different areas within with different areas within the organization did not know what the other organizations are doing. Now, I want you to think about this from a parallel circumstance that we would think about from a just our class. Let's say that you're doing a group project, because I know that's something that many people have done. And you're working on a part of your project and you're saying, hey, I'm trying to look for context. Can you tell me what you're doing? And your group member says, no, I refuse. I'm keeping everything private. And then the rest of the group members kind of keep that. It's like, well, I guess we're preparing our stuff independently. Does that kind of detract from the quality of your presentation if you don't know what the other group members are talking about? Because it's going to be really hard to stay consistent or make sure that you're not overlapping the same ground. That's just for a silly group presentation in college, okay? That's a problem with that. Now imagine that you're trying to build a multi-billion-dollar company, and you're trying to use it to create this device, and the chemical company and the chemical department and the engineering department don't have any idea what the other is doing, and they're not allowed to talk to each other. I would say that's a major problem for product development and for organizational efficiency. Speaking of the board of directors, we talked a little bit about them, that they had no idea what's going on. Did they have any say in Holmes in what Holmes' choices were? So when the board of directors conducted a vote, who had the ultimate say of what the vote was going to be? Elizabeth Holmes, because she controlled 99.7% of the voting rights on the board of directors. Boy, you talk about an unhealthy environment. That's not a rubber stamp. I don't know what is. Okay, I don't know what's going on there. Yeah. So anyway, and then how do we talk about the people that were in good Elizabeth's good graces? So the people who basically said this is a bad idea, you can't do this. What did Elizabeth do? She fired them. What about the people who were in the good graces? What did they say? Yes, Elizabeth, whatever you want, we'll make it happen. Okay. Had a lot of people that were in that kind of department. So you either went along with the project, you went along with what she said, or if you didn't, then Ramesh Sunny Balwani got rid of you. All right. Rationalization. So there's an interesting quote from the book. This is actually regarding the Walgreens launch. So they were not ready for the Walgreens launch. They were not at all prepared to actually handle that, but they had been putting it off. I think they talk about in the video it was a 4 month delay. So eventually, her lead lab lead or the guy who's in charge of the lab said, "Look, can we please delay this? Can we put this off for a little bit further? We are not in a position that we can do these blood tests effectively." And Elizabeth says, this is a direct quote, "When I promise something to a customer, I deliver." Now, that can kind of be construed as both a pressure and a rationalization, but that's a pretty obvious one. It's like saying, you're going to deliver under any circumstance, then it doesn't matter if things are correct. Now, this one's a kind of an interesting illusion. The other rationalization I came up with, and we can talk a little bit more in detail about this, but how do we characterize the environment in which Elizabeth was developing under? What was the kind of what was the individual that she was compared to in the video? The well-known Silicon Valley pioneer, Steve Jobs. Okay, and there's a lot of other comparisons made about people in the tech industry, and I'm going to talk about one of them in a little bit. But the idea in the tech industry is that you don't have to have a viable product. You just have an idea for a viable product, and eventually it will become viable. That was kind of the way that Facebook started out. That was kind of the way that Apple's devices have worked. It's the way of a lot of organizations. Can a medical company operate the same way? No. So there was this rationalization of the product will eventually work given enough time. So the problem is going to eventually work. Can we do that with an iPad? Can you have an iPad that's halfway working and then create updates for an iPad? I mean, it sucks. Your customers are going to be mad, but that's a viable approach. Has anybody ever played a video game that's like halfway complete and they have to send patches for the video game? Isn't that annoying when they send out a buggy product? Yeah, it's just such a pain. So that's something that's very commonplace in kind of technology fields. What happens if you send out a medical product that works only half the time? You get type 1 and type 2 errors, okay? And that's a real issue. That's what was happening with Theranos. So we can't actually do that. That's not you can't use that rationalization that the product will eventually work given enough time. And they actually talk about the end of the video. Would this product have eventually worked? There's a lot of people out there who are naysayers that said, yeah, this was a pipe dream. I think one of the quotes that's in the book talks about because of the way that the blood draws work, it was not a venous draw, which is basically you do it from the arm. Has anybody ever had a blood draw like that? Boy, those suck. And so, yeah, but they were trying to do it from pinprick from the finger. So what's the difference between a venous draw and a blood draw from the finger? Well, when you do it from the finger, there's a lot of tissue in the finger that gets drawn in with the blood right there. So it's kind of a contaminant to the blood draw. So you don't get the pure blood draw that occurs from the vein because there's no skin in the vein. All right. And so they were saying that trying to do the array of tests that you do from a finger prick that you could do from a venous draw was just, they were completely different realm of possibility. One technician and one professor, one professional in this area said, I would be more surprised if they'd solved the problem of time travel. All right. Now, obviously, that's kind of a hyperbolic statement, but it's still pretty extreme if you say, time travel is more viable than doing these tests to be a finger stick. So this is just eventually never going to work. So that rationalization may not have even been helpful. So my primary lessons learned from the case, don't trust a medical company with no medical expertise. That's probably a good starting point, all right? If you've got somebody on there who's a Stanford dropout and says, oh, so you're trying to solve a problem that 200 years of medical technicians have never been able to solve, well, good on you, okay? So there's that. What word would you use to describe Sunny Balwani? I think I used the word tyrant to describe him. I've also got another term here. I called him a monster. Those particularly appropriate terms for him? Yeah. What was the word used to describe Elizabeth Holmes that I think is probably apropos? Sociopath. Yeah, sociopath. They actually, there's the last chapter in the book says, I'm not sure if she applies as a sociopath, but she definitely had sociopathic tendencies. Just by the way, you think sociopath, so that's so rude. Well, by sociopath, we're actually talking about the technical definition, which is somebody who has no empathy for the decisions they make. They don't think about how their decisions actually impact others. And I think by that definition, somebody who releases medical devices without any concern about what the harm that it could create would be a sociopathic individual. Um, there's the big one, okay? Now, Holmes was kind of driven on this idea of basically creating this device and making it work under all costs. So it kind of started with an idea and then developed that idea. What if Holmes had basically been knowledgeable enough or even ethical enough to say, this idea is not going to work, I need to do something else? Do we think that she could have affected the world in a positive way? Ignoring the sociopathic nature, ignoring the fact that there's a sociopath, if she had acted with ethics and integrity, could she have changed the world in a positive way? I legitimately think so. This is a remarkable individual. The way that they described it, and I know I've used this term in other classes before, is that she had a reality distortion field. She made people believe what she said. They're like, it was compared to like Steve Jobs and Bill Clinton, people like that, people who are very well known in common vernacular. And so, had she been able to do this in a way that was kind of effective and meaningful, that would have had a product. I think she could have been a big. She could have been a big benefit to our society. Instead, now she's in jail. All right. So yeah, there's an interesting series of stories behind that about jail. So she got married shortly before, or shortly during. It was during the time that she was undergoing criminal trial proceedings. And so when she was found guilty, she became pregnant. Okay. So she had a child and then it said, okay, all right, now you've given birth, we're going to go ahead and send you to jail. So right before the sentence starts, she had a second child. Okay. Now, I'm not trying to say that Elizabeth Holmes got pregnant to avoid prison time, but that is just definitely not good planning if you say, I'm going to have children right before I go to jail and prison. She's still in prison. She's got two young children that are basically going unattended. And I say, it's just this evidence about being a sociopath is just adding up right there. It's just adding up. All right, some other notes, some interesting notes. So they talked about in the video about how Elizabeth's family came for money. So her great grandfather, so three greats and a grandfather, was Charles Louis Fleischmann, which you've probably heard of Fleischmann's yeast before. It's a baking product. It was created back in the mid 1800s and it's still used in households today, a fairly big household name. One of her mentors was Larry Ellison. Does anybody know who Larry Ellison is? So he was the founder of Oracle, and he was notorious for sending out bad products. Like he would promise something to a client, not even have a development template for it, would promise a timeline, would send out the product that was incomplete, and then would fix it after the fact. The way they call it, the kind of common vernacular in Silicon Valley was fake it until you make it, which is kind of where she got that tendency from, is that so we're a tech company, we can send out bad products, but we'll eventually fix it. No, you can't do that in medical tech. It's a completely different field, completely different problem. All right, somebody I want to talk about, Richard Fuse. All right, they didn't talk about him nearly enough in the video because he is a character. He is a piece of work or a piece of something. Even it's like he is a massive individual. So he basically was just kind of one of these individuals that if you slighted him, he was going to go to links of the earth to get revenge. So there's an actual story. He was. They talked about he was very wealthy from he sold medical technology and he would create these companies and these ideas. He was a very, very bright man, very brilliant, but a very, very petty individual. And so he created these companies and he would sell them off at massive profits. So one of these was sold to a company called Baxter International, which is a medical device company. And he actually confirmed it with the CEO at the time, which was Vernon Laux. So he's kind of makes this deal with Vernon Laux that basically he's going to sell the company, but he gets to stay on as the director of the organization. He gets to stay on. I don't remember what the official title was, but he gets actually some position in the organization because he wanted to continue drawing a salary and he didn't really have anything else to do. Well, they buy the company and they immediately fire Fuse. All right. Now here's where the plot thickens. Okay. What did we just say about Fuse? He was a very, very laid back individual. Like, no big deal. No, that's not it. Okay. He basically decided that he was going to get revenge at all costs. So he actually had a number of schemes. Some of the more interesting ones is that he actually took responsibility as a CIA or work with CIA. So he was doing a lot of work in the Middle East at the time. And so he would set up fake companies for the CIA as kind of shell companies so they could do operations of the CIA. Now that sounds really, really fictitious, but keep in mind this is like the 80s and 90s where CIA was kind of given free reign. And so he actually found out through CIA informants that Baxter International was getting a big contract in the area that violated a do not operate clause in that particular jurisdiction. And so he found information that basically said Baxter had violated a lot of terms, and he basically leaked this to the media. And so everybody kind of found out Baxter International was doing underhanded signals, and they basically got banned for like 10 years from operating in that region and just completely and totally destroyed the contract. So that was pretty crazy, right? Yeah. That's not all he did. All right. That's not all he did. So, yeah, Vernon Lux is also on the board of directors at, or one of the boards at Stanford, and he was coming to do some work at Stanford one semester. Fuse's son was actually at Stanford, and they launched a protest at Stanford about Baxter International CEO and how he lacked moral character. Massive protest on campus about this, and so he was removed from the board of directors at Stanford. All right, so Richard Fuse is an individual I do not want to get on the bad side of. Okay. Hopefully he does not watch this video because I'm Mr. Fuse. I mean this Dr. Fuse. My apologies, Dr. Fuse. I mean this in all possible. You're a credible individual. Your schemes are amazing. Okay. Very underrated, but amazing nonetheless. So yeah, I admire you. If I was going to be a fraudster, I want to be just like you. Um, there's actually a allusion in the video about something that is kind of funny about. Talks about how Sonny tried to use terms that he did not know the meaning of. So Sonny was a programmer. He basically a coder is kind of what they talked about. I think they said that he wrote 10 million lines of code. I think his claim was actually like a million lines of code, which is still ridiculous because most of the time people who get code utilized in projects like a few hundred lines maybe per year. So he would have had to have written like 10,000 lines of code a year and done that for actually 100,000 lines of code a year and then done that for 10 years, which is ridiculous in its own. But he was very, very well versed in technology, had no idea about the medical field or engineering. And so he would go to these meetings and try to listen in. And then when the term was used, he would kind of latch onto that term and use it over and over again. So much like someone else you know who might be teaching this class. So yeah, I tend to get a term and then tend to focus on it a lot more than I should. But yeah, I can poke fun at myself, guys. All right. So there's a funny story where they were talking about this term end effector, END space EFFECTOR. And so the idea being is that what is the result at the end and how does it affect the results? He misheard it and thought they said endofactor. And he kept using that term over and over again in the meeting. So that's hilarious. But then the engineers decided to have some fun with him. In the very beginning of the next meeting, they put up a PowerPoint slide and it talked about the effect of endofactors. And they kept talking about this and used this term over and over again. And Sonny's just like oblivious. He's just kind of like, and then he left the room and they just started cracking up at his expense. So it could have happened to a nicer individual. Does everybody know that Elizabeth Holmes gave a TED Talk? Yeah. Has anybody seen the TED Talk? You can't see it on TED because they removed it. Okay. Although they do actually have a whistleblower video for Erica Chung, who was one of the people who was kind of that uncovered the fraud. That's actually a pretty interesting video. But you can find Elizabeth Holmes' TED Talk. It's not through the TED website. It's actually been posted by an independent party. It is amazing just for the comments in the video alone. All right. So I highly recommend it. If you want to talk about somebody who sounds like they know what they're talking about, but never actually says nothing, again, like somebody who might be teaching this class, that's a good example of that. So fantastic watch. Now there was a comment at the end of the video I wanted to scrutinize. I want to get your opinion on, and we'll talk a little bit more about your impressions here in just a bit. But there was a statement at the very end of the video, no one outside could be blamed for not seeing the fraud ahead of time. That was a quote from the video. What do you all think about that statement? That's an accurate statement? I mean, we live in a generation where fraud at organizational levels is kind of commonplace. It occurs with heavy frequency. Maybe not to the degree of Theranos, but we're not that far removed from companies like Enron, WorldCom, Lehman Brothers, Madoff Securities, big, massive frauds where it was obvious that the lack of transparency was a deliberate concealment of activity. So if you don't know what's going on in the organization or being misled, you can't actually see a viable product. shouldn't you question that a little bit more thoroughly? Say, well, if we can't see the viable product, we won't invest. There was this concern about this fear of missing out. That was the term that was used. They don't think they actually use the term FOMO, but they definitely use the term fear of missing out and saying, well, we can't afford to miss out on this because if somebody else has it and they were right, then we lose out on that opportunity. So they were willing to lose millions of dollars, and that just by the feature of the fact that if they don't invest that money, that they could miss out on something potentially bigger. I think that's a rational approach. I don't think that's a proper approach. All right. I think that people who do that, they make sense to me, but it's not necessarily the right thing to do. What did you all think about this particular case? Just really, really boring and tedious. Yeah. This happens every day, Dr. Barnes. Not a big deal. Yeah. Obviously, it's a medical field, so there were some things that were not very relevant to us, but this is also a big fraud case, and there were like fraud risk factors all over the place. Anything that you found particularly insightful or entertaining?
You don't have a CFO for 10 years, there's probably something illegal.
Yeah. So CFO, I don't remember his name, but he was fired because he basically called into question the practices. And this was like 2005, 2006 when he was fired, and they didn't have it for the perimeter of time. But the CFO is certainly problematic. And not only did they not have a CFO, but Elizabeth deliberately tried to bury him. They said the reason that he was fired is because that he had pornographic materials on his computer. And it's true that they did have some unsavory materials, but that was not the reason he was fired in the first place. So that was one of those things that you will find a lot in this case is that if you get on Elizabeth's bad side, she will go to the ends of the earth to find something that is going to throw you under the bus. Okay. Clayton, do you have something?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting when you were talking about like how the video said that there was no way to see the fraud ahead of time. But George Schultz's grandson, Tyler Schultz, like literally went to him and said, hey, solve complete BS. And George Schultz was like, oh, I don't believe it.
So that's an interesting fact, and I want to kind of prepare you all for this. So they kind of treated Tyler Schultz like he was just a dumb kid who really didn't know what was going on. He was a graduate from Stanford with I think his degree was in engineering, but I don't remember for sure. But advanced degree, and he goes and says, "Yeah, they're completely and totally lying. They don't have a viable product." It's like, "Oh, you're just a nice kid, but you don't have any idea what the adults are doing." Isn't that patronizing? My gosh, like. Think about this from your position. You're in the same position, or basically in the same position that Tyler Schultz is. A lot of you are about ready to graduate and go on to your jobs. Imagine if a boss said that to you, or better, worse yet, if a relative said that to you. You went and said, "Yeah, my company is just kind of doing terrible things." Like, "Oh, you just don't know the way the business world works." Like, then what was the whole point of me spending 4 to 5 years in college? Like, yeah, we don't teach you how the business world works. It definitely doesn't work this way. Yeah. So yeah. By the way, Clayton pointed out something very interesting I wanted to share. So Christian Holmes, who's I believe both her brother and her father's name, and I believe is Christian Holmes Sr., Christian Holmes Jr. I could be wrong about that, but her father was not a very successful individual. He was very bitter about the whole Fleischmann debacle because his grandfather and father kind of used their money spuriously and just kind of tossed it away, and it was lost, and he didn't have anything of much of inheritance. But he had his own problems that he thought he was very, very capable, but could not keep a job. He actually had a really nice job up until about 2002 in the Houston area. But unfortunately, that company collapsed. Does anybody want to guess what company it was? It was Enron. Yes. Okay. Really nice job at Enron. Unfortunately, we know how that ended. Okay. Yeah. Enron was certainly a problem as well. Yeah. By the way, those auditing folks, we'll be talking about that after spring break. Yeah. Okay. Anything else that you identified that was interesting? There was so much to dig into on this one.
The CCTV footage of employees working.
Oh my gosh, wouldn't that just drive you insane if your boss is like saying you have to work 12 hours a day and I'm going to monitor your footage and like, but I finished my work, so it doesn't matter. You can still do work. Yeah, there were people there who legitimately did not have any work to do because they did not have any communication between the departments, but Sunny basically forced them to be there for 12 hours a day minimum. Boy, I would not be in an environment where I looked at. If Dr. Caden kept a closed caption off or camera in my room, I at the minimum I would cover it. Okay, I'd hang my coat up on it. Maximum I'd put there. I like the way I threw Dr. Caden under the bus on that one. It's like she would ever do something like that. You know, maybe some other individuals, maybe President Thomas, but if President Thomas did it, she'd probably have a very good reason for it because I am kind of a slacker. What you think, Mary? Oh, Ian Gibbons. Yeah, that one's a big tragedy. So Ian Gibbons, so interestingly, there's some stories about in the book about Ian Gibbons. He's actually kind of credited with a lot of the technology breakthroughs that Theranos had patented. So whose name was on on the patent? It had Ian Gibbons, but who do you think was the primary person on the technology? Elizabeth Holmes, yes. Even though, yeah, Stanford dropout came up with this incredible technology. Oh, and Ian Gibbons, who's renowned in his field. Boy, so he was actually let go from Theranos, then rehired at the advice of one of the people, but they demoted him and decreased his salary. He was basically kind of one of these people that had just incredible brain, just very, very brilliant. And if Elizabeth and Sonny had listened to him, could have maybe have actually made a difference. But he was kind of shoehorned into a situation where he was not doing anything productive and not able to provide feedback. And then they found out that his name was on all these patents. His name is on all these patents. And so, as part of Fuse's lawsuit to say, well, Elizabeth Holmes didn't actually create any of this stuff, he was called to testimony, and he said he was in a big, big depression at the time. Like they talked about how his mental health state worsened over time. And he basically said, I can't handle this, and committed suicide. And it was alcohol and narcotics. And because he was a chemist, he knew exactly what it was to destroy his liver. Like they said, his liver was just completely obliterated when he got to the hospital. So yeah, that's a dark one right there. It's a dark one. It's a lot of fun to make fun of Theranos, but that's a really unfortunate casualty for sure. Anyone else? I know y'all are just aching for the quiz. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on the quiz. All right, time for the results of the investigation. How do you all think you all did? So I'm going to be frank. I think that the results were fine. I think that some of the groups could have found a little bit more than they found, but I didn't think there was any big disparities. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in detail. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the easy questions, and then we're going to talk about the individual fraud. So the very first question is going to be, who committed the fraud? So who do you think was the primary fraudster for the RTBC case? Obviously, Ben H. That's why he's not here today, because he's embarrassed. Was Ben H. the fraudster in this one? He was not. So this interesting. There was some signals that kind of pointed to Ben H. And I like how I default to Ben H now, not say Ben Hill. It's like there's some signals that pointed to Ben, and that were kind of spurious. They said that he got a bonus and got his car, which you kind of said, well, I know it from the previous case. He's not a good dude. He's still not a good dude, but he didn't commit any fraud. Okay. What was kind of the big signal that he was not involved with one of the frauds? So what was remember the first case? He was basically able to do everything, all the responsibility areas. Okay. What do we call that? The violation of? Segregation of duties. Okay. Was there a segregation of duties in this case? There was, in fact. He had no reporting function. Okay. He could not report. So he could not actually committed the fraud related to ticket revenues. So Ben is in the clear. He is not the fraudster in this case. All right. I'm not going to say he's not the fraudster in the previous case or not a fraudster in real life, but why do I enjoy that joke so much? All right. Anyway, who was the primary fraudster? Everybody's really nervous. Like, if I get it wrong, Dr. Bynes is going to ridicule me. I will not ridicule you. It was Phil. Phil Akers. Phil Akers was the primary fraudster. Were there any accomplices in this fraud? Yes, there was. There was at least one that everybody caught. Who was the primary accomplice? Julie Roper. Julie Roper. So I think a couple of teams are actually, at least one team found the other accomplice. That was not really accomplice. I guess that's the wrong word. We're going to get to that. Okay. So I think there's a true accomplice. Julie Roper knew the fraud was going on. I think there were some people who were associated with the fraud, but not necessarily accomplices. They were not willing, or they were not knowledgeable participants, but they did definitely benefit from it. All right. So how the fraud was committed, let's go ahead and identify the frauds, and I'm going to have you guys do a debrief for that. So group six, Jenna, what was one of the frauds, and give me a brief rundown of how it was committed. Okay.
Fraud with Brian Roper and Sarah Roper, which are Julie's parents, that owners of Stop and Shop, and Julie carried out what enjoyed that and Bill around concealed it, and their parents benefited by receiving it.
Okay. So yeah, they own a convenience store. Okay. And what do convenience stores sell? Same thing concession stands sell. Okay. So who would take some of the product from the concession stand and sell to the convenience store? Yes, and that was what was going on. Yeah, it was one of the items that was being identified is that there was basically a concessions fraud. Okay. So yeah, who committed the fraud? It was primarily Julie in this situation. Julie was responsible for the concessions counts at the end of the day, and so anything that was left over at the end of the game, she was putting in the back of a truck and taking over to parents. Say, hey, we had some stuff left over. There's definitely nothing suspicious about this at all. Okay. I've gotten the go ahead from my boss, who happens to be your brother, and so you can go ahead and use this and sell this on your own. All right. We're going to get to that. There's a reason why all these people are related to Phil. Okay. So that was one fraud. What do we have for a second fraud? Let's go to group three. What was a fraud your group had, Meg?
Um, or-
Okay, that was the one that I think was the slam dunk one that everybody should have looked at the very beginning and say, there is something sus going on here. All right. But yeah, definitely one that's going on. So they were inflating ticket sales. Well, how they were doing that? What was the process?
That organizations who ordered group tickets over the phone but never actually paid for them. But they contacted to purchase the tickets.
Yes. What type of accounting do we practice as accounting practitioners, the financial accounting practitioners? What is that basis called? We talked about it in auditing, I think, yesterday. Accrual basis accounting. Okay, accrual basis accounting. And what does that mean? That means that if you can recognize a transaction before you actually receive the cash for that transaction, which kind of leads to fraud, which is why I hate accrual based accounting, accrual basis accounting. Yeah. So recognize a whole bunch of accounts receivable that never took place. Okay. We were in auditing, we'd saying existence violation, but we're not in auditing, we're in fraud. So yeah, creating a whole bunch of fictitious accounts receivables, and they look really, really good because these are kind of charitable organizations or youth organizations. It's like saying they wouldn't commit fraud. It says you're absolutely right. They would not commit fraud. The president of the organization would commit fraud by recording those and saying they're legitimate sales. All right. So, what was the reason behind this revenue fraud? Because we don't just create revenue frauds in a vacuum. At least I don't. I mean, maybe you guys do. You just could enjoy making your revenues look higher. But I'm assuming that we have to have a reason behind this revenue fraud. So, what was the goal? Right. So they're in the process of trying to receive a loan for construction, which we're going to talk about here in just a bit. But as part of this construction process, they were trying to get a loan on this. And there were terms for the loan, according to the bank, that if they met certain terms, they would get a better interest rate. So they could either get a 5%, 6%, or 7% interest rate. All right. Now, if you were to undertake your own loan from a bank, which rate would you like to take? The 5%. Okay. Anybody who said 7% and said, "Oh, I like to struggle, Dr. Barnes." It's like I appreciate your enthusiasm, but yeah, the rational answer is the 5% interest rate. So how did they qualify for that? And if you did a little bit of digging, the bank term said that during the periods that there was only one home game, there had to be zero net, at least a zero net profit. You could not run at a loss. Okay. And the reason they said behind that is that it's much harder to make a profit when there were fewer home games. But during the months that there were two home games, they had to have at least a 24% profit. So how do you inflate profit? You inflate your revenues. How do you inflate revenues? Create fictitious receivables, and voila, lower bank loan. So that's going to be an important point to note is that fraud that's committed had a lot to do with the misreporting of that, and that was the motivation behind it. Which, given that we know about financial reporting fraud, does that sound consistent with the motivation that we would see for financial reporting frauds? Yeah, the misreporting of revenues. We've talked a lot about that. Okay. So yeah, good identification. What do we got up for another fraud? Austin, let's jump over to your group. What's another fraud that you all identified? Okay, so what was going on with the construction contracts?
Um, you know, like a significant difference in their estimated cost.
Yeah. So Larkin won, and if you notice the dates of the bids, Larkin got their bid in right before the deadline, which may or may not be suspicious, but it's probably something worth investigation. The winning bid was the one who got their bid in last. Kind of pushes to this idea that maybe they had inside information, and they did. They did, in fact, have inside information. Phil basically told them what the other bids were and said, if you bid this amount, you'll win the contract. Well, that sounds great and all, but they still have to do the contract at that amount, right? Wrong. Then they started issuing change orders for a lot more money and ended up benefiting from those additional costs that were associated with that. And I think the additional cost was around the area of $100,000 in additional cost associated with that. So, and there was some very tangible evidence, which I think most of the groups identified that that there was a split between Phil and Jerry for the cost of those additional costs that were being incurred, and they both benefited from that. So, it was well done on that one. All right. Jack B, was there any other fraud?
We had something regarding the maintenance with Freddy's Fix-It.
Oh, yes, yes. This one was the challenging one. This one you had to scrutinize. Okay, so Freddy's Fix-It was was doing maintenance work. Now, why was that suspicious?
A lot of the maintenance was being done on the new facility.
Yeah,
When it
yeah.
did the maintenance.
Probably not needing a lot of maintenance on a new facility. Also, didn't they have an existing maintenance contract with AIA? Why would you need to have additional maintenance if you already got a maintenance contract that you're paying for? So I don't recall. I was looking over your answers in it, or do you know anything about Freddy's Fix-It? Does he have any distinguishment?
Related to Julie, so.
Yeah, so Freddie Roper is Julie's uncle, which makes him the sister of I don't know if it's Julie's father or mother, but I think it's father mother, but I could be wrong. But anyway, we're starting to see kind of a little bit of nepotism going on here, don't you think? Don't you think what's going on here? Yeah, so the nature of the fraud. And this one was by far the most challenging of the fraud. Some of the groups didn't catch it, and that's fine because I said this was going to be a challenging one. But the Freddy's Fix-It fraud was basically where Freddy was hired to do the work. Sometimes he did a good job and the value of the work was worthwhile. Sometimes he did kind of shoddy work and it was not worth the cost they paid him. Sometimes he did zero work. He did no work whatsoever, and there was no value in the payment that he was receiving. Did anybody do a little bit of digging and find out about Freddie's tendencies? I know the case administration groups had some information about this. How can we characterize Freddie? Or talk to the case administration groups. Freddie was a good guy, very hard, diligent worker, right? Always very, very versatile. No, he was not. He was kind of a gadabout. He was kind of just laid back and just didn't really do anything. He would go to work and then he'd say, "Hey, I'm at my favorite baseball team. Let me get a lawn chair and go watch the players practice." Boy, that sounds like fun. Getting paid to watch the players practice. Yeah, that's the job I want. Right after committing a massive fraud for Theranos. All right, so yeah, that's kind of my goal there. I got to admit, watching you guys practice, that would probably be pretty cool relative to working hard and having to actually do maintenance. That's why I'm kind of in the middle. I teach accounting. I don't actually do anything, but I sound like I do something. Okay, so yeah, this is right in the middle, but. I don't think Dr. Caden would pay me to watch you guys practice as cool as that would be. I'd be very, very impressed, but would not earn a lot of money. Anyway, again, put this on Dr. Caden. She has nothing to do with my salary. Anyway, all right. So we had four frauds here, four frauds that I identified. So the economic impact, just as a quick identification, what are we going to attribute for the economic impact? I think I talked about one of them, but let's just do the evaluation. So going back to Jenna, for the concessions fraud, what did your group identify for the economic impact on that?
14,677, representing a cost of stolen possession inventory over a 5-month period. Julie benefited by receiving 1,250 from her parents' store sales, and her parents received a total of 5,000.
So first of all, I really appreciate the approximately 14,477. That was a very accounting thing to say, even though yeah. Anyway, so you didn't go to the penny, which is what I was really looking for. No, that was pretty good. I think that's fairly close to the amount that's reported. There's going to be some differences because the amounts that are reported in the case are definitely include some information that's not necessarily immediately available. But that was pretty good identification there. And then Julie's identification of her benefit from it. She gave some of the product and their parents paid her in cash for the amounts that were being received for the concessions, the fraud. So, all right. I believe Meg, I asked you about the ticket revenue. This was kind of the big one. What was the scale of the fraud on the ticket revenue?
110,000 big ticket sales, and then for like their bonus calculation and like the loan, they ended up saving like 574,000.
Yeah. So there's kind of two impacts of the fraud. There was the overstatement of sales, and then the percentage that you're going to save for the bank loan on that. So kind of the economic impact on that, which was massive. It was like the bank was losing out on over $500,000. So certainly a big issue in that particular regard. Then Austin, I believe I talked to you next. You were talking about the construction fraud. And what was the impact of that? I even ignoring what I blurted out, okay? Ignoring what I blurted out, what did you all identify? Yeah, okay. So yeah, a lot going on with that one. And then that one's again a little bit hard to pinpoint, but certainly a lot of change orders that were marked up for the amounts that were going in there. Again, being split between Newbold and Acres, and there's that. And then we have Jack B with the Parties Fix It. What did you all identify on that one?
We never really get far enough to get an actual number.
Yeah. So I think he was paid a few $1,000s, which was by far the smallest of the frauds, but he was not doing all the work. So let's just talk really quickly about that. If you identified the fraud like this and you're concerned, all right, are they paying for nothing? What would be your approach as a fraud investigator to answer this question? So you could you actually observe the maintenance work that was performed? So I'm hired to fix a chair. That chair is broken right here, which is probably true. Okay. That I'm hired to fix the chair right over there. All right. Can you as an individual find a way to appraise the value of my work? Maybe not you individually. Okay. I'm an accountant. I don't do chair evaluation, but is there somebody out there who could evaluate the quality of my work? Could you hire somebody to do that? Yeah, you could perform an independent appraisal. And that was kind of the approach that you had to do for this one. It's like, let's appraise Freddie's work, and you find out that some of the work he did was good. He actually did a fine job. Sometimes he did not do a very good job, and sometimes he did no work whatsoever. Like the painting work he was hired to do, he didn't actually do any painting. So that was a complete and total loss on that. All right. So that's kind of the economic impact. Now, this is kind of the breakdown. We already know that Phil was the primary fraudster. We know that he brought in Julie. We know that his brother-in-law was involved, and I guess brother-in-law and sister-in-law, I guess it was. I don't remember the exact family relationships, but some of the in-laws were involved there. Now, what do we know about Phil's background? It's alluded to in the case, but you could have done some personal information digging to find out more about this. What is his history? He's the in charge of the Tallahassee bean counters, Dr. Barnes. What more do you want? So there's actually discussion in the case where you talked about Myrna, and Myrna talks a little bit about the history of the individuals, and they said, yeah, Phil used to be blank. Phil used to be Jim. Yeah, professional baseball player. That's where we were going there. Professional baseball player. Now, I know we've got some baseball players in the room, but I'm going to ask this to everyone because I'm sure that you have a broad knowledge about this one, but I'm going to turn to them if they know. So if you're a professional baseball player, financially speaking, do you do pretty well for yourself? What do you guys think, knowing what you know about baseball? Let's say so, okay. Yeah, even if you're just kind of a part-time player, you do pretty well. I believe the current minimum contract is what, at least $500,000 per year. I don't remember what it is. It used to be substantially less than that, but they increased that. It could be that. I could be completely in the ballpark. So I hear people typing, they're going to find out what is the minimum contract for baseball. What again, this is a 2010 case, so it's probably a little bit off. But he was a professional baseball player. Now, knowing what we know about history of individuals who come into wealth, okay, particularly professional athletes, are there people in the family who will take advantage of that? Like if you win the lottery, is there a possibility that you could have family members who you haven't talked to in like decades that are going to say, hey, it's good to see you again? Friends coming out of the woodwork saying, oh my gosh, you're my best friend in the entire world. What was your name again? Yeah. So yeah, people when you have wealth tend to be a lot more chummy, a lot more friendly to you. This is actually especially problematic for new people in professional athletics. Whenever we're done, so this is why we're protecting you at Truman to give you that financial literacy, so that when you guys go and become all stars, that you don't have people take advantage of you. So yeah, we're gonna know. But anyway, so professional athletes, especially ones who are not particularly aware and don't have good management. They get taken advantage of by their family members and friends, and there's certainly problems in that. Now, I'm talking about this for a reason. Do we think that this might have happened with Phil? If you do a little bit of digging on Phil, Phil had an MBA, so he was financially literate. So he was not necessarily being taken advantage of, but he's a good guy. He wanted to support his family. He wanted to take care of them. And if you do a little bit of history digging, you'll find out that he was paying for all of his extended family. All of his extended family was a professional baseball player. He basically was providing them checks saying, I'm flowing in dough right now. I got so much money I don't have to do it. Here's take some money, which that kind of leads to a little bit of a problem. What do we know about the longevity of professional athletes? They all work for like 40, 50 years, like they're like Tom Brady is still playing right now, isn't he? He's still playing into his 40s, which is still really impressive. Professional athletes definitely have a life expectancy on their careers, okay? At least in their primary careers. So maybe 10 years, 20 years if you're very, very lucky, but you've got it short term. So at that point, the money train kind of ended. And a lot of his family said, "Oh, it was good while it lasted," and went off. But who did not go off into the sunset? Bud Roper and Freddie Roper. All right, he was still trying to support them because they had no means of supporting themselves. Like Bud Roper was trying; he was trying to a convenience store, but it was not a very good convenience store. Freddie Roper was not even trying. He had Freddie's Fix-It Shop, where basically he listened to radio all day, listened to the baseball games all day. That was his job. So because his wife, who was kind of trying to persuade him to do a good job, basically said, "Yeah, you need to support these people, continue supporting them." And he was doing a pretty good job of it because he didn't immediately go over to the Tallahassee bean counters. He actually opened a restaurant. He opened a restaurant which was moderately successful. Did anybody figure out what happened to his restaurant? Why he came to the TBC? The restaurant was destroyed in a fire, all right, which he got the insurance proceeds from that, but unfortunately he had no more restaurants to actually support anymore. So now he's making what? I think it's like $90,000 a year and trying to support three families on $90,000 a year. All right. Does anybody feel comfortable that they could support three families on $90,000 a year? I've got news for you. It's not a good idea. Okay. I know that most of you probably will not initially make that when you do that, but eventually everybody in this room will be making that, if not more. Don't support three families on that. Support one at most, okay? Support one at most. I'm going to tell you that right now. So he's trying to do that best of, and what did he resort to? He resorted to fraud, okay? So from a fraud triangle perspective, this need to support his other family members, the ones who are not supporting themselves, what do we call that? Which are the fraud risk factors that represent? So he's got to support people financially. That's a financial pressure. Yes, pressure, okay? What was the opportunity here? What was the opportunity in this particular situation? How do we describe the owner, Franklin Kennedy? Was he a very hands-on owner of the organization? No, he's kind of like, here's $75,000, run the organization the way you want it. I want my money back by the end of the year. I'm in Boston. All right. So Franklin is kind of like very hands-off, which we know that from the previous case, that basically he had no kind of insight as to what was going on in the organization, did not have good organizational structure. Still true. The circumstances have changed. Phil's got to be able to do his own thing and do his own thing that he wanted to do, everything he wanted to do. And then rationalization. Rationalization is like, well, I'm not really hurting anyone because the way that I'm committing this fraud, it's taking very minimal from TBC. It's more from the bank. Okay, we're getting a good loan, favorable terms. And Ben is benefiting. Ben is getting his dream car. I'm not going to repeat what Ben calls his car. That is a very 2010 term to use. Okay. Did anybody read that, what he called it? Okay, he had a very derogatory term for it, which is I'm not going to talk about. But yeah, if I said that on video and somebody clipped this, I would lose my job. All right, lose my job. All right. Even in the interview, so I was interviewing our online student and I was talking about the car. I refused to use that term, even though it's something that Ben would say. Not Ben, but Ben Hill. Okay, that Ben Hill. He would totally say that, and I refuse to say it because we live in the year 2026 and not the year 2010. All right. So yeah. Certainly problematic, certainly an issue that now everybody's typing. So, what did Ben call his car? Yeah, not going to say it, guys. Not going to say it. Sorry. All right. So, what are the takeaways from this? What are the takeaways? We certainly have some problems at TBC. Fortunately, we're moving away from TBC for the next case. But can we say that the organizational structure can be certainly problematic, even if we don't have we have necessary segregation of duties in certain areas? The operational or operations organization seemed to be sorted out. A lot of people, when I was looking at their queries, they were still very focused on, did Ben do it? Did Ben do it? And Ben was a very, very big red herring in this particular case. All right. There was a lot of things we're still very suspicious about Ben, but people were kind of anchored on that. There were still some anchors that were existing from the previous ones. I did see a lot of questions about the equipment inventory. So again, kudos on memory, but you had to go in a different direction for these, and it was not necessarily easy. But it's challenging. It's challenging. It's always going to be challenging. A couple of notes. Want to encourage you to think about this way. So I mentioned this in the first case, and I didn't see a lot of pickup on this. Now I did not see all of the responses. Did not sort through every single response yet. But one of the areas that I think you should be very focused on is public records information. Okay, there's a lot of information that is publicly available about the people in the parties. That was something I said that I don't think any of the groups did that in the first case. I only think a couple of groups did that in the second case. So public records details would actually provide some insight on some of the things that I was talking about. Definitely provide some motivations. You would have found out a lot of detail about the histories of individuals and a little bit about their operations. Also, it's important to note with respect to the groups that were doing the case administration, they had a lot of turmoil to go through. There were some severe typos that they had to manage, and also there were some questions in there that were very difficult to answer. So I think one of the groups that did the case administration the first time is like, yeah, we get that. And the group that's going to be doing the case administration, just wait. It gets even more hairy once you move on. So you have to be a little bit more patient on that. It's not easy to question to answer. The one thing I would ask you to be very, very thorough about for the final case is when I set a deadline, please make sure you're aware of what your responsibilities are and get those in a timely manner, because it's not so much that you can ask the last question and the other groups will not try to do it, but it does impose a hardship on there. So for the case administrators in particular, in order to give timely responses, you need to be very, very thorough and very detailed in your responses to provide them with that. But overall, I thought it was a good case effort. I think that this was a much more difficult case than the first case, but I think you all did a better job than the first case because you had some experience on this. I'm going to say the third case is even more difficult than this one. Okay, not to dampen your enthusiasm, but I do expect you to improve upon that one as well. Okay, have a good spring break. We'll see you all a couple weeks.
What document is the name of the car and